really who he is was someone who called himself a cold-blooded killer, someone who called himself a god at times, or believed he was a god.
Christopher Daniel Duntsch, a former American neurosurgeon, gained a bad reputation as Dr. D or Dr. Death due to his medical malpractice, which resulted in severe harm to numerous patients. His actions were so disturbing that they inspired a TV series. Within a short period of less than 2 years, he faced 33 out of 38 patient-related felony charges, as brought into view by the Texas Medical Board. This case raises significant concerns about the trustworthiness of the medical professionals we entrust our lives to.
I'm just so grateful from the bottom of my heart. This will not bring my mother back, but it is some sense of justice.
In July 2015, Duntsch was captured and charged with 7 felonies, including 6 counts of aggravated assault with a dangerous weapon. These charges included 5 counts of aggravated assault, resulting in severe bodily harm, and 1 count of harming an elderly individual. The final charge was related to the disfigurement and paralysis of his closest friend. The prosecution placed particular emphasis on this charge due to its potential for the harshest penalties. After a 13-day presentation of the prosecution's case, the jury reflected for approximately 4 hours and found him guilty of all charges.
We, the jury, having found the defendant, Christopher Daniel Duntsch, guilty of injury to an elderly individual as charged in the indictment, unanimously assess his punishment, confinement and institutional division of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice for life.
And so we were overwhelmed, and this is my daughter, and this is a voice for Kelly, and we're so thankful, and hopefully we can move on with our life.
Rather than keeping his oath to care for his patients, Duntsch abused his position of power, causing pain and, in some instances, even death. He appeared to have pleasure from the authority he held, and may have continued his harmful actions if he hadn't been detained. Duntsch demonstrates the characteristics of a sociopath.
He's a monster.
Drug addict. A psychopath.
Killer.
With his 20-year sentence for war crimes upheld on appeal, Slobodan Praljak was not about to go quiet.
This case is deeply unsettling, and the events that unfolded are nothing short of horrifying. But before we dive into the shocking moment that occurred just seconds after this scene, let's first understand the background leading up to this point. Slobodan Praljak was a Bosnian-Croatian individual who, between 1992 and 1995, served in the Croatian Army and the Croatian Defense Council. In 2017, the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia concluded that Praljak was responsible for committing war crimes, crimes against humanity, and breaches of the Geneva Conventions during the Croat-Bosniak conflict.
The former commander of Bosnian Croat forces had been convicted of crimes against humanity, failing to act on information that the murders of Bosnian Muslims were planned.
In 2013, he and 5 other Bosnian Croat officials were found guilty of war crimes against the Bosniak people during the Bosniak-Croat War. Each of them received a 20-year prison sentence for their involvement.
Praljak was the former commander of the Bosnian Croat Defense Forces, imprisoned for crimes against humanity.
One of the accusations against Praljak asserted that between 1992 and 1994, he supervised a criminal enterprise through which the armed forces and the HVO conducted large-scale massacres against the Muslim population in 8 towns in Bosnia and Herzegovina. According to a UN press statement from 2004, Praljak was convicted of the destruction of a bridge and faced 4 counts of serious breaches of the Geneva Conventions, 6 counts of violations of the laws and customs of war, and 5 counts of crimes against humanity.
And being involved in the destruction of the city's historic old bridge and mosques.
Now, we come to the fateful day in November 2017 when Praljak made a shocking, unexpected move in front of the court, the media, and the entire world. Upon learning that his guilty verdict had been maintained, he openly declared his rejection of the court's decision and took an extreme step into his own hands.
Stop, please. Please sit down.
Monsieur le Président, notre client dit qu'il a bu un poison ce matin.
That step was poison. He was immediately rushed to a hospital where he was pronounced dead. This turn of events was highly unexpected for someone who believed in their innocence.
We'll break up soon, and I will kill more.
This is Luis Bracamontes, a convicted cop killer who fatally shot 2 experienced local law enforcement officers in California. Bracamontes, an illegal immigrant from Mexico, faced charges on 15 different counts. However, his behavior during the trial was particularly disturbing, as he displayed no remorse. He even went to the extent of mocking the grieving families and the judge. Adding to the shock, he directed an insult directly at Judge Steve White.
I don't regret it. The only thing that I regret is that I was killed too. I wish I killed more of those motherfuckers.
This disrespectful behavior pushed Judge White to his limit, leading to Bracamontes being escorted out of the courtroom.
You don't want to allow me to do that.
Ladies and gentlemen, you're able to step out of the hall.
We'll break up soon, and I will kill more.
It's not uncommon for individuals accused or convicted of serious crimes to show no remorse, especially if they maintain their innocence or attempt to downplay their guilt. However, the level of aggression and lack of remorse displayed by Bracamontes was exceptional, further fueling public outrage and media attention surrounding this case. Following that, he was sentenced in court, but there was no change in his behavior. He continued to smile, laugh, and blow kisses to his supporters. He even imitated firing a gun at them using his fingers. As he left the courtroom, Luis managed to make one more threatening statement. After all was said and done, the utter absence of remorse made it a clear decision for the jury. Luis was found guilty on all charges and received a death sentence in 2018. This is Kwahuru Govan, a convicted killer responsible for the murders of 2 young teenagers.
Govan was arrested 12 years after the crime, after advances in DNA technology matched his DNA profile to skin cells removed from beneath Sharabia's fingernails.
Govan's first murder occurred in 2004 when he abducted and suffocated 17-year-old Sharabia Thomas as she was on her way to school. Following this horrific act, he disfigured her body and hid the remains in laundry bags before discarding them in an alley.
Louis Beaton killed 17-year-old Sharabia Thomas in 2004, but was not caught until 2 years ago, thanks to advances in DNA.
And now prosecutors say she's not the only person he killed.
It took 12 years for Govan to be detained, thanks to advancements in DNA technology. Investigators obtained a breakthrough when they found a DNA match from skin cells under Sharabia's nails. However, this wasn't the extent of Govan's crimes. He also killed and dismembered 19-year-old Rashawn Brazel, who happened to be his cousin and lived across the street.
He said, "Ma, if I ever leave, I want to be remembered."
In 2012, Govan was arrested on an armed robbery charge. This led to the addition of his DNA in the database, ultimately linking him to the 2 murders of Sharabia Thomas and Rashawn Brazel. Later, DNA evidence further tied Govan to 2 additional murders involving disfigurement. During his sentencing, he had an outburst in court.
More than a dozen police officers dragged 38-year-old Kwahuru Govan into a Brooklyn courtroom this morning.
I have the right to stand. I have the right to stand in court. I have the right to stand in court. No, they don't want to stand when he's gone.
Fortunately, the justice system played its part, and he was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison without the possibility of parole. This is Andrew Romero, a convict who is responsible for the killing of a police officer in New Mexico. At the time, Romero and his then-girlfriend, Tabitha Littles, had just committed a robbery at a fast food restaurant and were en route to another potential robbery. However, their plans were disturbed when Officer Benner pulled them over due to suspicious license plates. Tragically, Romero shot and killed Officer Benner. As he fled the scene, he attempted to dispose of the murder weapon. Romero now faces multiple charges and the prospect of life in prison if he is found guilty.
Andrew Romero sentenced me to a life without Greg, a life alone.
During the court proceedings, there were disturbing reports of Romero smirking while Officer Benner's wife provided her emotional victim impact statement. One of Officer Benner's colleagues also testified about Romero's shameful behavior during the trial.
In the trial, I watched the arrogant Andrew Romero scoff and find amusement in the videos and photographs of my friend laying in the
Shockingly, just 2 weeks after his arrest, Romero made a call home, seemingly unaware to the severity of his actions, asking for a $20 bill as if nothing had occurred.
Can you ask my nonna to come put me some money and you'll give it back to her, like $20 right now? Have me in Reds and Sig 4 and I don't know, it's all
It appeared that he was taken aback by the level of attention his killing of a police officer had gathered in the news.
You're all over the news, everybody knows. You know?
While Romero's attorney attempted to portray him in a favorable light, both the judge and the prosecution saw through these efforts and formed their own opinions about his crime and behavior in the courtroom.
It has been easy to paint him into a devil and a monster. He's going to spend the rest of his life in a concrete box.
What I would really like to happen to you, I can't say in court because I'll probably be removed from office. You will die in prison.
There are a lot of victims in this case, but I'm sorry, Andrew Romero is not one of them.
In the end, the verdict was clear. Romero was found guilty of all charges brought against him, and he now faces a lifetime behind bars with no possibility of parole.
Slobodan Milosevic, former president of Serbia and Yugoslavia, is the first head of state to be tried by an international court on charges of war crimes and genocide.
At the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, the war crimes prosecution of Slobodan Milosevic, the former president of the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, spanned slightly over 4 years, beginning in 2002 and finishing in 2006. Milosevic was charged with 66 counts of crimes against humanity, genocide, and war crimes for his role during the Yugoslav wars of the 1990s.
Te su vesti kružile od jednog do drugog, dodavalo se nešto, povećavalo se, kaže se stiglo je u kapelu 4 leša, onda neko doda nije 4 nego je 40, onda neko doda nije 40 nego je mnogo više.
In 2016, the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia issued its judgment in the separate trial of Radovan Karadzic, which determined that there was evidence associating Milosevic in the realization of a common criminal goal.
Guilty of the following counts. Count 2, genocide. Count 3, persecution, a crime against humanity.
Milosevic was also indicted for crimes committed during the Kosovo conflict, with the first accusation being related to deportation. The prosecution alleged that Milosevic was involved in orchestrating a campaign of violence and terror aimed at forcing a significant portion of the Kosovo Albanian population to flee and maintain Serb control over Kosovo. The term ethnic cleansing was seen as the primary objective of this conflict.
Šta vam je ostalo dole? Šta mu ostalo? Sve ostalo i ništa nema.
Da si još 3 dana da mi se ote jedna krava od pelina po 10 km.
Ajde be, šta plaćeš ti? Šta ima tu?
On March 11th, 2006, the lifeless body of Slobodan Milosevic was discovered in his cell in the United Nations War Crimes Tribunal detention facility. Conrad Robert Murray, a retired cardiologist from Grenada, gained infamy for serving as Michael Jackson's personal physician at the time of the singer's tragic passing in 2009. He became the prime suspect due to his negligent use of the anesthetic chemical propofol, which ultimately resulted in Jackson's death. Following a 2-year legal battle to determine responsibility for Michael Jackson's unexpected demise, a California jury reached a dramatic verdict, finding Dr. Conrad Murray guilty of involuntary manslaughter.
We, the jury in the above entitled action, find the defendant, Conrad Robert Murray, guilty of the crime of involuntary manslaughter.
The audible scream heard at the reading of the verdict was that of LaToya Jackson, the late pop icon's sister, while Dr. Murray's reaction was notably different. Fans of Michael Jackson exploded into a thrilled celebration outside the courtroom in downtown LA County.
There are at least 200 to 300 people out in front. There you hear this as the verdict was announced. The crowd here went into a huge cheer. Most of them here, of course, Michael Jackson fans, and they were happy that he was found guilty.
Yes. So the judge is getting ready to poll the jurors, but there we have heard it. It is guilty of involuntary manslaughter.
Despite Dr. Murray's request for bail being denied by the LA County Superior Court judge, officers quickly handcuffed him and took him into custody. Following his conviction, he faced a relatively short jail term of 4 years, and his behavior did not suggest much remorse. Given the seriousness of the case involving the death of the king of pop and a true global icon, many believed that a life sentence would have been more appropriate. Aileen Wuornos was executed by lethal injection on October 9, 2002, for 6 of the murders for which she had been convicted. She had spent 12 years on death row in Florida.
Yeah.
You killed 7 men.
Yes, you
and
did.
I'm asking you, what got you to kill the 7
And
men?
I'm telling you because the cops let me keep killing them, Nick. Don't you get it?
On the final day of her court proceedings before her execution, Wuornos made a complaint about her innocence, raising the question of how she could claim innocence when she had committed the murders. Her case was marked by her psychopathic nature and a history of psychological disturbances, which played a significant role in her criminal behavior. Wuornos's life and crimes have been a subject of public interest and debate, with some arguing that her troubled background and mental health issues should have been considered in her sentencing. Nonetheless, she remains a controversial figure in the history of criminal justice.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I lost my life because of it. Couldn't even get a fair trial. Couldn't even get a fair investigation or nothing.
People on the outside do not know what evil is.
Do you know what evil is?
Sure.
Are you evil?
Somewhat.
Between 1972 and 1989, an American serial killer known as the Genese River Killer instilled fear in the city of Rochester, New York. His first victims were a child and a girl, both of whom he brutally murdered.
What he did to them, like I said, was a pretty graphic thing. And that's going to be between him and his maker.
He was initially arrested after their deaths, and in exchange for his guilty plea, received a 25-year sentence with credit for time served. Unfortunately, the consequences of this early release would come back to haunt those who approved it. It turned out that he continued to commit crimes after being released. For nearly a year, he refrained from killing, but in July 1989, the police discovered the skeletal remains of an elderly homeless woman, Dorothy Keeler, on Seth Green Island in the Genese River. At the time, investigators were unaware of the motive behind her murder.
She used to live in my house, or my apartment, for a while.
Was she a friend?
She was, till she started stealing stuff out of the house.
This was just the beginning. During the fall of 1989, the banks of the Genese River in Rochester, New York, became grim crime scenes with the remains of murdered women. 4 weeks later, the killings took an even darker turn as he continued ruthlessly taking the lives of his victims one after another. In court, he attempted to present himself as mentally ill, but the jury rejected his insanity defense after hearing 3 weeks of testimony.
Good evening. It was the longest trial in Monroe County history.
Serial killer Arthur Shawcross found guilty.
They found him guilty on all the counts of murder. He was sentenced to 250 years in jail.
I'm obviously very pleased. I may not be showing it, but inside I'm very ecstatic by the verdict. I think it's something that can only benefit this community. And as I said before, I think it's something that the victims' families at least can look at the system and say justice was finally done.
He was found guilty on all counts of murder and sentenced to 250 years in prison.
Do you see yourself as something of a celebrity here?
Of course.
In what way?
Well, everybody knows what I'm here for.
His actions earned him chilling infamy, although it's nothing to take pride in. Shawcross passed away on November 10, 2008, at the age of 63, and many believe the world is better off without him.
Don Shawcross still had nothing to say. You're looking at the first shots of him leaving the courthouse as the convicted serial killer. Shawcross heads back to jail for what will obviously be a very long time.
Giovanni Borjas is an individual who committed atrocious crimes, including rape and murder of 2 young women. He cold-heartedly discarded one victim's body on a Los Angeles freeway, which was discovered a month later. Tragically, 8 months later, he repeated this horrifying act with his 22-year-old mother, Brianna Guzman, leaving her body on the same freeway.
Brianna Guzman, who disappeared the day after Christmas 2011, her body found a month later.
Borjas worked in a pharmacy in the neighborhood where both victims lived, which might have been how he encountered them. His critical error was spitting on the ground while leaving the scene, providing the police with crucial DNA evidence. Initially, the DNA didn't match anyone in their database. However, the police pursued the familial DNA process, which required approval from the state attorney general's office. It turned out that Borjas's father was in prison and in the database, leading to a breakthrough in the case.
He wasn't the murderer because his DNA that was found at the crime scene didn't match, but it was close enough for detectives to follow his son around, Giovanni Borjas, 24 hours a day.
DNA evidence led authorities to charge Giovanni Borjas in 2017.
Almost close to a year later, I'm going to be doing the same for my own niece.
And I see an assortment of murderers that runs the entire gamut of every kind of murder under every kind of circumstance. All those people I sentenced, I've never found anyone as cold-blooded as you. There was no reason for these crimes.
During emotional court proceedings, when Guzman's mother and brother delivered heartfelt speeches, Borjas appeared unremorseful and detached from the seriousness of his actions. In the end, he was charged on all counts and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Cold-blooded killer is a fitting description of his actions.
Robert Bales told a military court that he committed the worst American atrocity in the Afghan war, but he does not know why.
Robert Bales, a former U.S. Army sniper, carried out a horrific mass killing of 16 Afghan civilians on March 11, 2012, an event known as the Kandahar massacre. To avoid execution, he pleaded guilty to 16 counts of murder, 6 counts of attempted murder, and 7 acts of assault. On August 23, 2013, Bales was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Prior to his sentencing, he voiced remorse for the killings, referring to them as an act of cowardice. His brother also testified on his behalf during the trial.
Robert Bales pleaded guilty to 16 counts of murder, and a military jury has been deciding whether he would be able to get parole. He called his rampage a, quote, act of cowardice.
His brother testified about their childhood. Bill Bales says Staff Sergeant Robert Bales was an outgoing person who served as his high school class president and captain of the football team in Norwood, where they grew up.
In 2019, Bales' attorney announced plans to seek a new trial in civilian court. Their argument centered around the claim that Bales had been experiencing side effects of the anti-malaria medication mefloquine at the time of the shooting. Bales alleged that this medication may have contributed to his actions. This appeal aimed to reduce his sentence from the original death penalty to life in prison with the possibility of parole. The ruling drew anger from villagers in Afghanistan and the relatives of the victims, who believed that Bales deserved the death penalty. This sentiment is understandable, given the severity of the crimes. However, the defense's claim that Bales had used mefloquine was considered speculative by a panel of 3 judges. Ultimately, the Supreme Court of the United States declined to consider Bales's appeal, leaving a sentence of life in prison without parole in place.
This is a person who volcanically erupted behaviorally. The hatred, the paranoia, the psychosis just unleashed itself upon the world.
Danny Rolling, widely known as the Gainesville Ripper, committed a horrifying series of crimes over 4 days in August 1990, during which he murdered 5 college students in Gainesville, Florida. In his later confession, Rolling admitted to not only killing but also raping many of his victims. He revealed additional crimes, including the murder of 3 people in his hometown of Shreveport, Louisiana, and an attempted murder of his own father during the same month.
He remembered forever as someone that lost the Gainesville student murder cases, and that was kind of a terrifying.
I don't even know how much longer I'm going to be on this earth, but when I die, I hope I'm ready. I hope I die half as bravely as the people who perished at my hand.
Rolling was indicted on 5 charges of murder in November 1991. It took about 4 years from the time of indictment for him to face trial for these atrocious crimes. He reportedly idolized Ted Bundy, and he referred to himself as a superstar. During his sentencing, he attempted to act as though he were one of his so-called admirers.
I recall the day I first saw you. I reached out to say I love you, but it was hard to say. I couldn't touch you.
The jury took about 6 hours over 2 days to reach its recommendations.
Those recommendations were unanimous and identical. Jurors deciding 12-0 that Danny Rolling should die in the electric chair.
Imposed the death penalty upon Danny Harold Rolling.
While there was some satisfaction in seeing justice served, the extended 9-year wait for his execution also sparked controversy. One of the victim's family members had a suggestion to address this issue, which many might agree with. However, for the time being, it was a relief that he was off the streets, allowing Gainesville to gradually return to a sense of normality.
We just miss her a lot, and we know that nothing we ever do can bring her back. If they kill Danny Rolling, they lock him up forever. Christy will never come back, and so that's hard. That's why this will never be over. It'll never be over for any of us.
It shouldn't take 9 years for him to go to get the chair.
It can't take 10 years for him to go to the chair. I mean, why can't the chair just be in the courtroom? I mean, if the chair could be right there. I mean, this guy did what they brought out on this trial was just monstrous, heinous, horrible things that it should not be tolerated.
Abel Gallegos, age 36, is facing a list of serious criminal charges, including first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, second-degree kidnapping, retaliation against a witness, and tampering with a deceased body. The victim in this case was 28-year-old Simone Duran. According to reports, Gallegos had initiated contact with Duran through social media and managed to persuade her to meet with him, along with Rene Rosales and Alonzo Quintana. Tragically, Duran was lured, kidnapped, shot 10 times while pleading for her life, and her body was set on fire.
I am struck by the casualness in which it was committed, the absolute disregard for human life.
What makes this case even more puzzling is that it is Gallegos' 6th felony conviction, and he has faced parole or trial withdrawal at least 8 times as well. During his sentencing, the judge declared, "You can't live among us anymore." As a result, Gallegos was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, along with an additional 163 years, ensuring he would remain imprisoned for the remainder of his life.
A Florida woman is accused of trying to kill her husband. So she applies for bond. But the judge in this case denies her application, and this is what happens next.
My husband broke my leg. Please, no, don't do that.
Blanca Regalado, a 53-year-old woman, faced charges of attempted murder in 2013. She had been enduring abuse at the hands of her intoxicated husband, and one day, she decided she had reached her breaking point.
Prosecutors say she stabbed her husband 6 times.
But her husband is now recovering and has since been released from the hospital, and today she's expected back in court.
Understanding that her husband could become aggressive when drinking, she chose to keep a hidden Swiss Army knife, thinking it might help address the issue. When the next drunken outburst occurred, she took matters into her own hands and stabbed him 6 times. In court, the situation took an interesting turn. It seemed that she believed she had valid reasons for her actions, and some might sympathize with her in that regard. However, the law is the law, and the judge is bound to follow it.
No bond.
No hay fianza.
No, no fine, Mary.
¡No! Me tengo que ir a la cárcel así, pero mi marido me pegó. Si él es que me rompió la pierna. Por favor, my husband broke my leg. Please, no, don't do that. I have my leg broke. No, please, don't do that. Don't do that. No, please, no.
This case indeed has its complications and raises questions about self-defense and the limits of the law when it comes to abusive situations.
I mean, she stabbed her husband 6 times. Did she just expect she was going to be let go? I mean, we'll see what happens here in court, but what a terrible thing to have to listen to.
Yeah, very sad.
All right, thank you very much.
When the military overturned the country's fragile democracy, from that point on, savage repression against many sectors of the population would become state policy. The policy of a terrorist state.
Jorge Rafael Videla served as the de facto president of Argentina from March 1976 to March 1981. During his time in power as commander-in-chief of the army and a member of the military junta, his administration, which coincided with Operation Condor, is remembered as one of the darkest periods in Latin America during the Cold War era. This is due to the widespread human rights violations and disastrous economic policies that characterized his rule.
Serving a life sentence in prison for crimes committed under a dictatorship that disappeared more than 30,000 people and instated a repressive culture and a neoliberal economic program.
A just war against subversion, he says, in which as many as 30,000 Argentines were detained, tortured, and disappeared.
Under Videla's leadership, the government engaged in horrific practices, including kidnappings and forced disappearances, extensive torture, and the extrajudicial murder of activists and political opponents. Many of their family members were sent to secret concentration camps. The trial of the juntas in 1985 estimated that between 13,000 and 30,000 political dissidents disappeared during this period.
For Maria Adela Varela Antocolets, whose brother Daniel, a 39-year-old law professor, was arrested and never seen again.
Le quitaron la vida, pero también la identidad. ¿Qué quiero decir con esto? Fueron convertidos en NSNs, en fosas comunes, tirados por...
Videla was also known for providing refuge to several Nazi fugitives, earning him the nickname the Hitler of Pampa.
The highlight of a week of convictions against violators of human rights, a life sentence for 85-year-old Jorge Rafael Videla.
On October 10, 2008, Videla was sent to military jail. He was later retried and received a life sentence in civilian jail in 2010 for his involvement in the killings of 31 detainees during and after the coup. Videla was also found guilty of the widespread abduction of children during his presidency and was sentenced to 50 years in a civilian jail on July 5, 2012.
Argentine dictator Jorge Rafael Videla died on Friday at the age of 87.
Videla passed away at the Marco Paz civilian jail the following year. It is claimed that he slipped in the shower, leading to his death 5 days later. His legacy remains one of human rights abuses, dictatorial rule, and a dark chapter in Argentina's history.
Do that matter?
Yes, it does.
Tyrell Webster, a 28-year-old from Cincinnati, was convicted of murder following a disturbing incident. He had gone to visit his friend, 47-year-old Grover Cleveland Watson, with the intention of doing laundry, enjoying some beers, and playing cards. However, an argument between the two escalated, leading to Webster pulling out a gun and fatally shooting Watson. Webster faced first-degree murder charges, and his behavior during the court proceedings revealed a shocking lack of remorse, especially when Watson's blind sister delivered her testimony. She had to inquire about Webster's location so she could address him directly.
And he was taken from us on my brother's birthday, which hurts very, very much.
Do that matter?
Yes, it does.
Despite Webster's apparent lack of remorse, Watson's sister attempted to find some positive words as she gave her closing statement. Tragically, she couldn't see that Webster had reacted by laughing it off. However, the judge was not willing to let this behavior go unchecked, and the sister's tone abruptly shifted to deliver a reality check.
When I heard the story on the news, the first thing I did after I could close my mouth was just to ask God to forgive you, because you didn't know what you were doing.
So you know he's laughing right now.
I really don't care about this, because you know what, you laughing now, but the moment they get you behind those prison walls for the rest of your life, you will be somebody's girlfriend, and that smile will no longer be on your face, it will be tears.
She did not hold back in expressing her emotions, and considering the circumstances, her reactions were entirely understandable. Webster was ultimately sentenced to 18 years to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
Wow. What have you done? I don't know who you are now. Maybe I never knew. Maybe none of us did.
Lawrence Larry Nasser, the former team doctor for the United States women's gymnastics team, was found guilty of committing unspeakable acts on his athletes. He exploited his position as the team doctor to victimize hundreds of young competitors, and the scandal that came to light in 2015 would become one of the most significant medical cover-ups in North American history, known as the USA Gymnastics Exploitation Scandal.
You did this to yourself, and you did this to us.
According to the allegations, Nasser repeatedly abused at least 265 young women and girls while pretending to provide them with medical treatment. Many of his victims were gymnasts from both the United States women's gymnastics team and the Olympic competition team.
And while we all are moving mountains, you, Larry, will have no choice but to sit in prison and wait to die.
Nasser was sentenced to state prison terms that were to run alongside with his federal sentence, as directed by the judge overseeing the federal case. This effectively meant that he would serve a life sentence in prison without the possibility of parole.
I will be out in the real world, thriving, empowering, and standing by others, while you rot in a prison cell the rest of your life.
The tears shed by Nasser did not gather him any sympathy, nor should they have, considering the widespread harm he inflicted on countless young athletes. John Spooner, a 76-year-old man, was responsible for the tragic shooting of his 13-year-old neighbor, Darius Simmons, in broad daylight. Spooner faced a life sentence for the killing of the young teenager and was charged with intentional homicide.
I asked him why he got that gun on my baby.
And where are you at when you asked Mr. Spooner why he has that gun on your baby?
I'm in the doorway.
The day of the crime was captured on video by Spooner's security cameras. In the footage, Darius Simmons can be seen taking out the trash when Spooner emerges from his house with a gun. He pointed it at Darius, and then at Darius's mother, who was standing in the doorway. After a brief moment, Spooner fired the weapon, taking the life of the 13-year-old boy. Darius's older brother gave an emotional testimony in court.
And what were you doing as your brother's in your arms?
Talking to him. My little brother wasn't saying nothing, like talking to nobody. I was crying, and at the same time mad, because he's still on the corner with the gun.
During the trial, a video of Spooner's interrogation was played, emphasizing his lack of remorse for his actions. It was revealed that Spooner had also considered shooting Darius's older brother, but held back from doing so due to the presence of numerous bystanders at the scene.
But you told the doctor that you wanted to shoot that boy too. You decided not to do it because there was other people around, right?
Yes, they were in back of him.
But you wanted to shoot that boy too.
Yes.
And if those people weren't in back of that boy, you would have shot that boy too.
I wouldn't try.
Despite these actions, Spooner was considered sane and competent to stand trial, and he was ultimately found guilty on all charges. The tragic incident highlights the devastating consequences of such senseless acts of violence.
Somebody with that gun? Yes, I did. Who did you shoot? I guess a 13-year-old kid. When you say you guess, that's what her mother said.
California doctor, the first ever to be found guilty of causing the deaths of patients by overprescribing powerful medicines. Prosecutors said she did it for the money, making millions while her patients died.
A medical professional from Southern California was found responsible for the deaths of 3 of her patients, all of whom had overdosed on drugs. During the sentencing, Lisa Tseng, the medical professional in question, did not display any signs of emotion. This lack of emotional response during the punishment could be interpreted as a lack of remorse, although it could also be indicative of other factors.
Shall receive the sentencing term as prescribed under the law as dictated under Penal Code Section 190, subsection A, that is, a term of 15 years to life for each count to run consecutively to one another. Thus, a term of 30 years to life for counts 1 and 4.
Life in prison if convicted on all 24 counts. Again, the preliminary hearing gets underway later on this morning at the criminal courthouse.
According to the primary prosecutor in the case, Tseng was the first doctor in the history of the United States to be found guilty of murder for prescribing drugs irresponsibly. This verdict came at a time when the opioid epidemic was a significant concern, making it a matter of particular importance. Even after discovering that her patients were dying due to her prescriptions, Tseng continued to write bad prescriptions, which the judge found to be a terrible violation of her professional responsibility.
On October 30th, 2015, a jury convicted the defendant, Lisa Tseng, of 3 counts of second-degree murder and 19 counts of unlawfully prescribing a controlled substance in violation of Health and Safety Code Section 11-153.
Tseng's lack of remorse remained evident throughout the trial, as she maintained a seemingly emotionless behavior. As a result, she is now serving a life sentence behind bars. Ebenezer Byrd, along with accomplices Jerry Spalding and Gregory Jean Baptiste, was involved in the torture and tragic murder of Janelle Melton, a school teacher from Red Bank.
But every action has a consequence, and you are responsible for your own actions.
When Janelle failed to appear at school, her ex-husband, Michael, went to her residence to check on her. What he discovered was a horrifying scene. Janelle had been brutally beaten and killed. Detectives began questioning Michael, initially considering him a suspect.
At first, the detectives started out like they was trying to get information and ask me about our relationship. And then when I started answering the questions and telling them, then they started getting a little invasive.
Indicated a pink-colored lighter, and the lighter itself seemed to be out of place.
However, a crucial lead emerged when a lighter was found in Janelle's non-smoking apartment, which didn't belong to her. This discovery shifted the focus away from Michael as the main suspect. He decided to conduct his own investigation and learned that the intended target of the attack was a drug dealer living in the apartment next to Janelle's. Tragically, the criminals entered Janelle's apartment by mistake. This revelation led to a new suspect.
So he says it's him and Jerry Spalding, and he's with a girl. Do you know the girl if I showed you a picture?
Elizabeth Pinto.
So tell me about in September, early September, what happens?
You could see there's a little bit of fear in her eyes.
Byrd and his girlfriend were subsequently interrogated. The girlfriend had driven the 3 men to Janelle's apartment. The investigation also uncovered additional incriminating evidence, including the lighter, which belonged to Gregory Jean Baptiste, and phone records that placed them at the scene of the crime. As a result of this evidence, Ebenezer Byrd was charged with first-degree felony murder, second-degree conspiracy, and weapons charges, ultimately leading to a life sentence without the possibility of parole. This case showcases the importance of a thorough investigation to ensure that justice is served.
This was a terrible, terrible mistake, and there have been consequences.
The Redonda Vaught homicide case involved the legal proceedings against Redonda Vaught, a former nurse at the Vanderbilt University Medical Center. Vaught was found guilty of criminal negligent homicide and impaired adult abuse for administering an incorrect amount of medication to a patient in 2017, which tragically resulted in the patient's death.
Vaught was supposed to give her patient, Shailene Murphy, a mild sedative before a routine procedure. Instead, she administered a lethal dose of the paralyzing agent vecuronium, which comes with this clear warning label.
This trial gathered widespread attention and ignited a national debate on when it is appropriate to prosecute healthcare professionals for medical errors that lead to harm to patients.
It is very obvious. They don't know about healthcare. They don't give a about nurses. I don't care what Chad Jackson says.
Hundreds of nurses kept a vigil outside court, followed the dramatic sentencing on loudspeakers.
During her court appearance to receive her sentence, Vaught was initially facing a probable sentence of 6 years in prison. However, she ultimately received a more lenient sentence of 6 months probation. The surprising twist in this case was the victim's family, who played a key role in the decision. The family's compassionate and forgiving stance led to the reduced sentence. Vaught expressed her gratitude with tears in her eyes, and she offered sincere condolences to the victim's family.
Saying I'm sorry doesn't seem like enough, but you deserve to hear that, and you deserve to know that I'm very sorry for what happened.
The victim's family asked the judge to show mercy.
We forgive her. My mother-in-law would want her to be forgiven. And jail time is not an option to me.
I mean, it's sad all the way around for everybody. I mean, not only my family, but hers also.
In the end, the judge decided to place Redonda Vaught on probation for a period of 3 years. This case highlights the complex ethical and legal issues surrounding medical errors and the role of compassion and forgiveness in the justice system.
My plea of guilty to not guilty, and I'm withdrawing my plea to appeal. I'm withdrawing my plea to appeal.
A state Supreme Court judge lashes out at a defendant who injured a child after the man tried to change his guilty plea.
Judge William Bowler had a hard time hiding his anger at Marcel Brooks after Brooks tried to change his mind right before sentencing.
Marcel Brooks was involved in a disturbing case in which he was entrusted with the care of a toddler and, in a fit of irritation, violently shook the child, causing lifelong disabilities. Shockingly, this was not the first time that Marcel had faced such charges, as he had a prior charge for shaking another baby.
Marcel Brooks is a career criminal who, for the second time in less than 7 years, was sent to prison for shaking a baby. Devin is left with lasting medical issues affecting his eyesight and his ability to stand and use his left hand. He requires therapy 6 days a week. In this most recent case, Brooks was so violent, the child may never fully recover.
In this particular incident, Marcel was babysitting his girlfriend's baby, and when the child's grandparents walked in, they caught him violently shaking the toddler.
Seeing him in court today with a smirk on his face, it was like, I can imagine what other grandparents and parents would do. You know, you just want to go there and you just want to strangle him and say, why did you do this to this baby? This baby didn't hurt you at all.
During the court proceedings, Brooks displayed a shocking lack of remorse for his actions. He made jokes and was even caught laughing, which was viewed as shameful given the seriousness of the situation.
Because you, after a very detailed plea colloquy, admitted to me what you did.
Under extreme emotional duress.
No, you weren't.
I was.
Asked you the questions.
I was.
He's a career criminal who had a prior shaken baby case before, and that's unconscionable.
In an attempt to avoid the consequences of his actions, Brooks tried to withdraw his guilty plea and engaged in arguments with his lawyer. He attempted to claim that the baby's injuries were pre-existing, asserting his innocence. However, his past actions painted a different picture.
I would like my rights to appeal, sir. I wasn't explained the consequences of that from my lawyer.
You were explained it to me in court.
Yeah, he told me I can appeal.
That on your conviction for the crime of assault in the first degree.
Sign it. I'll sign it on your behalf because you abused a child years ago. You admitted to me you abused this child.
I got video evidence that showed that he had the injury beforehand. September 29, 2016. The injury happened October 5th, 2016.
I'll make a note that you refuse to sign this.
Okay.
I'm signing this.
You want to see these cases, these individuals go away to jail for as long as possible. And this case right here, we got him in jail for as long as possible.
Fortunately, justice prevailed, and Marcel Brooks was found guilty. He received a 15-year prison sentence, with the added restriction that he would never be allowed to be around another child in the future. This case highlights the importance of protecting the most vulnerable members of society. Big thanks to our viewers for joining the courtroom journey with us. Your interest in the stories of justice is what keeps our channel alive.